heartburn, acid reflux, dyspepsia, or gastroesophageal reflux disease. These are all overlapping synonyms referring to roughly the same situation, and there are a lot of treatments available for it, some of which are over the counter. So what is heartburn and how can you treat it? Hello there everybody, welcome back to another episode of Pharmacy for the People, where I try to put your health back into your hands by giving you the tools that you need to overcome the oppressive tyranny of medical complexity and cultural disillusionment. I am your host, James. I'm a doctor of pharmacy. I'm a pharmacist, licensed and practicing. And if you're new here, if you enjoy this video today, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel and then sending it to somebody that you think that this would actually benefit, that this would be really helpful for. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the last video, my wife has just recently, a little over 11 weeks ago, given birth to our second little girl. And despite how much we love her, she has not been the easiest child to deal with or to care for. But that always seems the way that way with the second child, right? We took her to the pediatrician, and the pediatrician was able to help tell us that she has reflux or acid reflux. It's pretty common in infants. It's usually associated with a good bit of spitting up and salivation. And fussiness. For us, what it meant was that she was not a good sleeper nor a good eater, which is basically, 2/3 of an infant's existence. So what is reflux? What am I talking about physiologically here? Acid reflux or heartburn or gastroesophageal reflux disease, they're all terms referring to the backwash of stomach acid from your stomach up into your esophagus. Let's say you're eating a meal, you're probably chewing it, swallowing it through your esophagus down into your stomach, where it gets broken down even further from the delicious wads of food and closer to a form that your body can absorb into the bloodstream and then send it around your body for use, general use. As part of this dissolution process, your stomach is full of various amounts of acid that's there for dissolving said wads of food. Hydrochloric acid in particular. The lining of the stomach has a lot of these cells called parietal cells that make this acid. They're responsible for producing this acidic environment. These parietal cells have pumps on the outside that exchange potassium ions for protons into the stomach against the concentration gradient using ATP. So what the heck am I talking about? What does that even mean? This term proton here is kind of a chemistry colloquialism. It's referring to a hydrogen atom. Hydrogen atoms only have one proton and no neutrons, so instead of saying hydrogen atoms, sometimes they're just referred to as protons. And then this pump that I'm talking about, this pump is actually a channel through the lipid bilayer of a cell that allows the passing of ions or charged particles through this lipid bilayer into and out of the cell. Without these channels, ions like sodium, potassium, chloride, these things can't move in between the outside and the inside of cells. So these ion channels are very important. Some of these ion channels are active and some of them are passive. These passive ion channels allow the moving of these ions with the concentration gradient across inside and outside of the cell. So from the place of highest concentration to the point of lowest concentration. That's passive. And then active is by it's going to move these ions against the gradient. So even though there's, say, more potassium on the inside of the cell, it's still going to pump more potassium into the cell in exchange for something else. And it does this using energy from the molecule ATP, which you probably remember from either chemistry or basic biology or biochemistry or something. So this proton pump on the parietal cells is an active ion channel that pumps these hydrogen atoms or protons into the acidic environment in exchange for potassium against this concentration gradient. Remember proton pump? Does that sound familiar? Have you ever seen a commercial that talks about a proton pump? Anyway, so the high concentration of these protons is what makes acid so caustic. That's what makes it able to dissolve what it is that it dissolves. So these parietal cells are concentrating acid in your stomach. And what stimulates these parietal cells to do their jobs is a signal cascade that when your body is about to eat something, your body signals that you're going to need more acid to help dissolve the food, to absorb it, to use it. So three of these signaling molecules are gastrin, acetylcholine, and histamine. And they signal to these parietal cells to increase the number of these proton pumps and help increase the amount of acid. So that's how your stomach gets acidic, which is all fine and well as long as that acid stays where it needs to. The stomach has a protective lining that prevents it from being broken down by this hydrochloric acid. But what about the areas around it, like your esophagus? Well, at the very top of the stomach, your esophagus meets the top of your stomach. There's a small ring of muscle called the cardiac sphincter. Yes, it is a sphincter, and no, your butt is nowhere near your stomach. But any ring of muscle that closes tubes, that's called a sphincter. But as long as this cardiac sphincter stays closed, the acid stays put in your stomach. But it's possible for this cardiac sphincter to be weakened, to be too loose, for something to physically block it from closing all the way. And when that happens, acid can wash back up into the esophagus, outside the area tough enough to handle the acid, and you have heartburn. But my guess is that if you're watching this video, you either currently have heartburn, have had heartburn in your past, or you're just very curious. Anyway, so you want to know how to treat heartburn. So let's dive into that. Well, first things first, let's talk about lifestyle modification. Lifestyle modification can help to prevent heartburn from happening, and if you can prevent something from happening, that's always better than treating it, right? Typically. So let's start with a couple practical tips. For instance, the acid concentration in your stomach is the highest around a meal, right? So if you eat something and then you go and lay down, or if you're eating in bed, you have a much higher risk of gravity just moving that acid from your stomach up into your esophagus. So try not to lay down around a meal. That might help. Likewise, if the heartburn is going on or happening randomly at different times of the day, not necessarily around a meal, but if it's waking you up at night, for instance, it's possible that you can raise the head of your bed just a little bit, just by a few degrees, and that will help gravity keep acid in your stomach. Don't raise it too much. You'll end up at the foot of your bed or off the side. That's not fun either. Another thing you can do is try to reduce the amount of pressure that's physically on your stomach that might be forcing acid up into your esophagus if the stomach is unable to relax. Practical things like how tight is your clothing? How tight is your belt? Where is your belt sitting? Could losing weight help you to get the pressure off of your stomach? And then possibly eating smaller meals throughout the day so there isn't so much internal pressure in your stomach. If your stomach is very full, it's producing a lot of acid, and there may not be as much space for that acid to go, and so it's eroding up into your esophagus. Practical ideas, right? Aside from those things, it's also possible that you have certain triggers in your life that are causing heartburn to happen in the first place. The foods that you eat can trigger heartburn. Sometimes these foods will trigger a relaxation of that cardiac sphincter and help the acid to move up. Sometimes it's not that clear cut, but you eat something or you drink something and you have heartburn afterwards. Tobacco and alcohol are two of the most potent or major triggers for heartburn. I actually have a close friend that was trying all these different therapies that I just talked about. He tried over-the-counter therapies. He went and saw a physician. And he was actually looking at surgical intervention to help with the heartburn when he stopped drinking or cut way back on drinking, and the heartburn just kind of went away. So for him, the trigger was alcohol. Again, if you can figure out what these triggers are, then you won't have to deal with it in the first place. Instead of giving a long list of what these common triggers are, I'm going to link something down in the description below so you can go and peruse and find out if you're commonly eating any of these triggers. But certain foods like chocolate, fried foods, mint, these can all be common triggers, food triggers. So if you don't feel like looking at that list I'm going to post, but I recommend it anyway. So again, prevention is better than treatment. But say that you've already gone through this list, you've tried a whole bunch of stuff and you're having a hard time, or the reflux just hurts and you really want to deal with it in the meantime until you can figure out what's causing the heartburn, what your trigger is. So that's where I come in. I'm a pharmacist. I'm going to help you come up with over-the-counter solutions for dealing with your heartburn until you can figure out what's causing your heartburn. So over-the-counter or OTC meds, you may recall, these are the medications that you can buy in a pharmacy without a prescription. You can just grab it off the shelf, take it up, and pay for it. These are generally considered safe and effective as long as you follow the instructions on the label, okay? All right, so let's talk about these different classes that we're going to use. Option number one is going to be antacids. Antacids are buffers or substances in your body that can neutralize acid in your stomach or esophagus when you take it by mouth, by soaking up some of those caustic protons in the acid. That's how a buffer works, is that it either offers more protons to an alkaline environment, or it soaks up some of the protons in an acidic environment. If you use an antacid when you're having reflux, it can cool and soothe the burning sensation associated with the acid. These are great because they work on contact. As soon as you take it, it's going to come into contact with the acid and start helping to neutralize it. This includes medications like Tums, Rolaids, Pepto-Bismol to a certain extent, Maalox. You know how taking a Tums or Rolaids can sometimes feel like you're just sucking on a piece of sidewalk chalk? Well, it's because it's mostly made out of the same stuff, sodium bicarbonate. Sodium bicarbonate is great for soaking up protons or writing love letters to a sweetheart in second grade on a sidewalk. Different antacids use different methods for reducing acid, but they all follow the same basic premise, which is to neutralize acid in a fast-acting way. Option number two, H2 blockers. I mentioned that the ramping up of acid production in your stomach happens by a series of signaling molecules, included in which is histamine. Yes, that's the same histamine that makes you sneeze from allergies when the trees outside are coating our entire lives in a thick yellow paste. Histamine causes a ramping up of acid production in your body, and it also, in your stomach, and it also produces many effects around the rest of your body. The receptors on these parietal cells that switch on the acid production are these H2 receptors, or histamine type 2 receptors, and it increases the amount of acid being produced. So if you can block these receptors on these parietal cells, it slows down acid production and helps to reduce the sheer volume of acid in your stomach, and thus reducing heartburn. It's good stuff. Famotidine, cimetidine, nizatidine, and ranitidine are 4 H2 blockers that you can find over the counter, or at least you could find over the counter. Ranitidine was recently removed from the market because the way that they were making the tablet, not the drug itself, but the way that they were making the tablet included an excipient, something that goes into a tablet that's not the active med. It included an excipient that there was concern that it was causing cancer. It wasn't a confirmed causal link, but it was enough for the FDA to flag it and for the manufacturers to just take it off the market. So do yourself a favor, if you have any ranitidine sitting around somewhere in your house, just chuck it. Don't keep it. I also would have a hard time recommending cimetidine unless you're not taking any other medications, because cimetidine has a lot of drug-drug interactions, we call them. And what's going on here is that the way that your liver metabolizes cimetidine significantly affects the way that your liver metabolizes many other medications. It works, it's good, it's available, but if you're taking a lot of other prescription medications in particular, I wouldn't recommend that one unless you first talk to your pharmacist or your physician. You should know that H2 blockers take about 30 minutes for it to get to the site, be absorbed, and then start affecting these parietal cells. This one's a little bit different. It's not just affecting the acid on the surface of the stomach or the esophagus. It's actually going into the cells and affecting those parietal cells there. So it has to be absorbed into your body first, so it takes longer. So H2 blockers are a good option if you can anticipate heartburn and prevent it from starting. Like if you know you're about to go eat a giant chocolate mint onion burger and it's going to give you heartburn, then you can take this ahead of time and hopefully prevent heartburn. But if you can't anticipate it and you've got it going on, there are a few combo medications out there that have both an antacid and an H2 blocker in it at the same time, which means as you take it, it's going to help to neutralize that heartburn on contact with the antacid, and then the H2 blocker is going to go in and help block those parietal cells and prevent the heartburn from continuing. There's a few products out there. Pepsid has one called Pepsid Complete. I really like it. This is not an advertisement. There are lots of generic products out there that do the exact same thing. So I like those. It's nice to have them on hand. Option 3 are proton pump inhibitors. Proton pump inhibitors, or PPIs, actually go in and block those ion channels that I described earlier as proton pumps. They go in and irreversibly bind to these pumps in the parietal cells and prevent them from ever working again. But your cells are constantly producing new ion channels and getting rid of the old ones that don't work. So it doesn't shut down all acid production, it just reduces it for a longer period of time than either the antacid or the H2 blockers. 3 of the over-the-counter PPIs that you can find out there are omeprazole, esomeprazole, and lansoprazole. These usually take 30 to 60 minutes to start having their effect when you take them, and they don't typically ramp up their full effect for a few days of using them. So this is best used when you're having recurrent heartburn and you know that you're going to have heartburn. Say you've been having it for a couple weeks or months, hopefully not. But you usually take it daily, not as needed, for the full course until your acid production drops and the heartburn stops. Which leads me to my next thought. How long should you be using these medications before you stop using them? Well, first, if you're having side effects to any of the medications that you're using, side effects with these kinds of medications are usually related to using them for a prolonged period of time or just the general reduction of the acidity of your stomach. The acid in your stomach is not just for breaking down delicious wads of food. It also acts as a barrier, a physical barrier to prevent things getting through your stomach and into the rest of your body. It's not foolproof, but it does destroy a lot of things. Bacteria, viruses, worms, and other parasites. It can really help with that stuff. So whenever you reduce the acidity of the acid in your stomach, it increases the risk of one of those things getting through over time. Likewise, changing the acidity of our stomach can also have an effect on the way that our bodies absorb other medications and nutrients. Remember that acidity, or pH, has a significant chemical effect on other molecules, including our body. Remember, this is all chemistry, right? So if you expose any given molecule, any given compound to a significant amount of protons or hydrogen atoms, it can change the way that molecule functions in our body, or change the way that our body functions, right? So it can have an effect on the way that other medications get into our bloodstream, or affect the way that we absorb other nutrients, like calcium and magnesium in particular. But again, those effects are usually only manifest over a long period of use with these things. We're not talking about stopping the absorption of calcium and magnesium, just reducing it a little bit. And over time, that can become an effect. That can become a side effect or a problem. Among the nutrients that are poorly absorbed includes vitamin B12, or cyanocobalamin. And this isn't because of the acidity of the environment. This is because the parietal cells, they're also responsible for producing something called intrinsic factor. Intrinsic factor is just a molecule that helps our bodies to absorb this vitamin B12 molecule. Without it, we don't absorb it very well at all. And when one of the issues is that when you take a PPI or you do something that reduces the activity of those parietal cells, it can also reduce the production of this intrinsic factor. Over a long period of time, this can cause our body to be deficient in what it needs for mature red blood cell development, which can cause an anemia, or macrocytic anemia. So vitamin B12 supplementation might be something that people have to use if they're on these medications for a long period of time. But I've just told you that they need to be limited. So how do we limit it? So one of the ways that we're limiting it is if we experience these side effects, we do our best to come off of these medications. Am I scaring you with these side effects? I hope not. I hope I've made my case clear that it's usually over a long period of use that these side effects start to manifest. So how do you use over-the-counter products to treat heartburn and not experience these side effects? Typically, it's just follow the directions on the back of the box. There's a limit to how long you can use over-the-counter products before you're going to need additional intervention. So if your symptoms are persisting after the recommended duration of using these products, which is usually only about 2 weeks, it's going to be important for you to consider going and seeing a physician. Heartburn that's left untreated over a long period of time can cause changes, physiological changes to your esophagus that become very, very serious. This isn't just a discomfort or an inconvenience when you eat food. It can have a very real long-term side effect. Not just taking the medications, but what's going on in your body. So if your symptoms are persisting, please consider going to see a physician. So that's what heartburn is, some practical ways on how to prevent it, and some over-the-counter medications that you can use to treat it. Hey, thank you so much for your time and attention here today, guys. If this video was helpful, and I sincerely hope that it was, consider subscribing to the channel or sending this to somebody else and see if it helps them too. If you've tried some of these over-the-counter products and had a different experience, or you've tried something else to treat heartburn and it was effective, let me know that down in the comments too. I'd love to find out and hear from you. So thanks again for watching, and hopefully now you're a little bit more equipped for handling medication issues for yourselves and your families. Power to the people. Different antacids use different antacids use